Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Spiritual Leader. I'm your host, Darren Baldwin, and I'm joined by my wife, Laura. And we are stirred up about this particular subject. If you didn't get a chance to join us last week, I encourage you to go back and watch that or listen. It's so important, Laura, the season and the time that we have found ourselves right now.
Yeah.
You know, so many generations have... Every generation has their times of crisis and challenge, and it's up to that generation to rise up and overcome, or it's going to be their demise to accept defeat and to just carry on in some other direction. But we've been talking about freedom and American freedom.
Yeah.
We've been talking about freedoms in the church because this is very much now carried over into the church. We've had a lot of challenges in 2020, the year that we're in currently. There's been a lot of attacks on churches, etc. And, this is not going to go away. This is not going to go away. This is the time for believers, those that have really God's cry of freedom in their heart, to rise up and to tackle these issues, Laura, head on. To tackle these issues. We were discussing this earlier, and we read the prophecy from Kenneth E. Hagin on the last one, that 60 years ago he prophesied and said that atheistic communism was going to infiltrate this country, and it was going to take root, and it was going to become a substantial part of our political system as political leaders of all kinds leaned towards that direction. The scary thing is, in the prophecy, it said, Laura, that they were deceived.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, if you've ever spoken to a person that was deceived, you look into their eyes, and it doesn't matter what you tell them. It doesn't matter what you say to them.
Yeah.
They are convinced that what they are believing and where they're headed is absolutely right. And we're here to tell you today that some of what we are experiencing in our country and in the church is not right.
Yeah.
I want to get into some of this, Laura, some of our freedoms.
Yeah.
Just so you know, if you've not experienced this yourself, we've been undergoing some serious attacks over the last number of years when it comes to the freedom of speech.
Yeah.
I preached this, I don't know how many years ago, between 10 and 15 years ago. I began to see this pattern emerging that, and some of you, if you're out there, you've seen it, and I hope you're not on the wrong side of these issues. But I began to see, Laura, that if we stood up and we said something that went against, now the term is cancel culture. Yeah. That's what the buzzword is now. But we've been watching this for really 20 years. I have been. If you rose up and you said something that this extreme group of people in our nation did not agree with, you would then be labeled as whatever the terms are, whatever area you were speaking out on. God forbid that somebody in America can be allowed to have an opinion that others don't agree with. I mean, that is one of the core values of this nation. I mean, it is in writing that we have the freedom to speak.
Yeah.
And Laura, this very, very, very important freedom has now been challenged to the point where that slippery slope, that foundation that makes America what America is, the foundation has become eroded and it has become weak. I've seen it with my own eyes. People that have spoken out against things that have been wrongfully accused and even imprisoned. People that refuse to, provide certain things or services that have been labeled and ripped apart by the media and by the undercurrents of what's going on in our society right now. Folks, this is not the time to get sleepy.
Yeah.
This is not the time to just throw in the towel. This is not the time to just sit around and allow these things to continue to grow. Laura, we must stand up for what's right.
Yeah.
It's just, it's mind-blowing.
I agree. I read to you the other day, there was an article that the Supreme Court Justice Alito just gave. He just gave an interview. And in the interview, he said, "We have never before seen restrictions as severe, extensive, and prolonged as those experienced for most of 2020. The virus has resulted in previously unimaginable restrictions on individual liberty." Jesus. And whatever people believe about the coronavirus restrictions, the U.S. cannot allow the restrictions to stand after the pandemic has passed. He also goes on to say that houses of worship, churches, have been treated unfairly compared to other businesses during the pandemic, like in the case of casinos in Nevada. He said Nevada was unable to provide any justification for treating casinos more favorably than other houses of worship. Yet the court still deferred to the governor, who favored the state's biggest industry. He said religious liberty is in danger of becoming a second-class right.
It's unbelievable.
And that's from one of our Supreme Court justices. He sees it.
It's unbelievable.
And they don't normally speak out,
Yeah.
about things like that, but apparently he felt so strongly about it that he had to speak out.
Yeah, it's beyond what I can even comprehend right now, the state. We actually just watched a clip, Laura, of a pastor that we know of.
Yeah.
He's on Christian television, a very just a good man of God. He's doing a great work for the Lord, raising up people by the hundreds and thousands to take part in this end-time move of God. His actual church was, he had a judge rule against him during the time of the presidential election. And basically the ruling said that you are actually not a church. You are just a conference center, and we are revoking your religious exemption. Therefore, you have to abide by all of the laws and the rules that would apply to everyone else. In this country, Laura, we have what's called religious freedom. We have the right to assemble peacefully.
Yeah.
And I don't care what anybody says. This is an absolute work of the devil.
No, he has a 3,200 seat auditorium, and they told him the max number you can have in a 3,200 seat auditorium, plenty of room for social distancing, he said, was 175 people. That was it.
Yeah.
And they had health inspectors there that were on site that gave them, 2 pages long of all kinds of things that they had to follow to the T, or they were going to shut them down. They inspected every person to make sure that they, had a mask on, that everybody was distanced. He said they ended up having to use 8 different rooms to be able to get the people in, on campus for the conference that they were having. He said, we made it. He said, people were blessed. He said, but it was unreal what they had to do to make it happen.
And Laura, we have to stop and just take pause for a moment and ask ourselves, how did we get here?
Yeah.
How did we get to this position where, as I said already, I never thought in my lifetime that we would ever get to a place in these United States of America where our freedom of speech is in jeopardy, our religious freedoms are in jeopardy. If you can't see that, I feel very sorry for you, because you are deeply blinded and deceived right now to not see that the very freedoms that this country was built on are now in jeopardy. It is something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. But we have to take pause and ask ourselves, how did we get here? Now, you and I, we were privy to a podcast that was released a few months ago in the height of some of these really tumultuous riots in these cities, where just outrageous attacks were happening on buildings and businesses and police, etc. And we watched this podcast, and this guy played a clip from a former KGB official, and you can look it up on YouTube. I don't know the name of it. If we have it, we can post it on the thing at the end. But you could actually probably just Google KGB interview, whatever, and it'll probably come up. This guy described that this prophecy that we read in the last podcast that Kenneth E. Hagin gave, he said there was going to be the release of atheistic communism into the United States of America. And folks, on the watch of the previous generations, as far as the church was concerned, they have allowed this destructive doctrine to be introduced into our college campuses, universities, all across the nation.
Well,
It has...
I was going to say, and so then our young people are becoming indoctrinated with this atheism, communism,
communistic atheism.
and then they're becoming our leaders.
Yeah, and
then
that's
they're
what...
standing in those places of authority.
And that's exactly what happened, Laura.
Yeah.
This started in the 1960s. Now, so many of the politicians and people that are in power, they actually, whether they admit it or not, or whether they realize it or not, we need to call a spade, like my mom says. What does that mean? That means you call it like you see it. Because we're looking at this stuff, and, you know, people are fearful in this climate where we're scared to speak our minds now because we don't want to be labeled. We don't want to be ripped apart by the secular media. But we've got to call a spade, Laura. So many of these people in power right now have subscribed to what this gentleman refers to as Marxist, or he refers to Leninism, which is it's the steps before a country actually steps into a full-fledged communism. It's unlike anything I could have ever imagined.
It's demoralization.
Yes.
And basically
American values.
It skews and twists like the bedrock, you know, of our beliefs of an American society. And so now it's so far removed from what they once were.
Yeah. Like things like these basic things we're talking about, freedom, Laura.
Yeah.
There has been a great brainwashing that has happened in this country over the last 60 or more years. And unfortunately, whether we admit it or not, unfortunately, so many of our leaders in this nation are not pro-America. They are not pro-church. I would go it's not even a stretch. I would go as far as to say this is a very anti-Christ agenda that we have stepped into, that it will affect the church. It will affect the freedoms that we possess in this land up till this point. But I believe if I'm talking to Christians and Americans, it's time for us to fight back. This is what this revolution is all about. Now, we, up to this point, Laura, we have kept we have kept quiet. We have preached the word of God, preached the truth. We have not ventured into, and I'm still not venturing into necessarily the political arena. But what's right is right here. And this is not about Democrat or Republican. This is about right and wrong. This is about darkness and light. It's time for every believer to take a position of actually what it looks like to fight for freedom. Like we've said, the Revolutionary War, there was a fight for freedom. In World War II, there was a fight for freedom. Even in times of great turmoil in this country during the Civil War, there was still a fight for freedom. There was still a fight for liberty, Laura. And it was men and women who had faith in God, who stood up during the most tumultuous times of our nation's history. And pastors preached it from their pulpits. They preached the heart of God in the cry for freedom that every believer should fight for when it comes to freedoms. Let's not wait till it's too late and our freedoms are gone. Let's fight for freedom while we're actually free to do so. And as we move forward, Laura, we're going to do just at least one more podcast on this subject. We're going to actually get into, finally,
we're going to give some
the hope. We're going to get into the hope. Hate to drag you along for 3 weeks here. But some of this is important, Laura. We have to catch the spirit.
You got to recognize.
We got to catch the spirit.
Your eyes must be open to see that, you know, is there not a cause?
I like that.
Not a cause?
I like
because
that.
there is a cause.
So we're fighting. We're not fighting in our own strength. We're standing in the strength of the Lord. Yeah. It's time for believers to stand up for what's right.
Amen.
And to stand up for the truth. So we love you. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Today we're going to pick up on the next podcast, and we're going to give the answer. It's going to be a great day of light and explosions of light in this nation as we see this final battle lines being drawn, that we are stepping into the time, Laura, where the church is going to shine as bright as they have ever shined.
Amen.
We love you. We'll see you next time.